something amazing happened. The rare last-minute home game actually came together.
Alright, so sorry for jumping right into some hands here, but it's amazing how fast 10 minutes will go when you want to get into some pretty deep hand analysis, I hope. So first of all, we sat down and played a tournament, started seven-handed. This stage of the tournament, we are actually six-handed. Started with with a stack of 400. At the time of this hand, my stack was sitting at 730, and blinds are 510 at this point. So in this particular hand, I'm on the button and look down at two black aces. So the literal best hand in poker. So it limps and folds around to us. Of course, we put in a raise. We make it 40 to go, so 4x. The big blind calls, and the cutoff, who was the only limper in the hand, folds. So we actually go heads up to the flop here. The flop comes 10-8-3 with two diamonds. So there is a flush draw there. The big blind, villain in the hand, checks. We bet 60 into the pot of 95. The big blind pretty quickly check raises to 160. A little bit of thought, but I pretty quickly make the call. Then the turn comes a six of hearts. So completing 7-9 and a couple of weird two pairs, or making a set, of course. But other than that, really a pretty good card. The big blind checks it over to us, and so we go ahead and bet 200, this time into the pot of roughly 400-ish, so a little bit less than half pot, I believe. The big blind thinks for a while and ultimately makes the call. The river is a pretty good one, all things considered. 5 of spades. So a couple straight draws get there, but most importantly, no diamonds come home. So the big blind checks it pretty quickly to us, and without a whole lot of thought process, we go ahead and jam our remaining 330. At this point in time, the big blind kind of goes into the tank, thinks for quite a while. I should also mention the big blind in this hand happens to be another participant in the Vlogger in Paradise Challenge. So I'll put a link to his channel in the description down below. His name is Matt Kiefer. So we play a lot of these home games together. So definitely take a look at his channel if you've run across mine and have not seen Matt's yet.
Should be recording this one.
I am.
Oh yeah. Don't worry.
He thinks for quite a while, talks it over with himself, runs through a lot of possibilities, probably 2 or 3 minutes worth of tanking and thinking, and ultimately lets it go. Tells us after the hand that he had 9-10 of diamonds for flop top pair with the flush draw to go along with it. So pretty solid hand there. Pretty happy with the way it played. We played it, and obviously a favorable run out for the pocket aces there.
Maybe he had aces.
All right, so the next hand, still in the tournament, blinds have jumped up to 1530. And our stack this hand, we started with about 1025. In this hand, we're in the cutoff. We're five-handed now. We look down at the 5 of diamonds, 5 of clubs. So pocket fives, five-handed in the cutoff, which is actually second to act in this scenario, given that we're also under the gun +1 in a short-handed scenario. That being said, any pair in a five-handed situation feels like a pretty decent hand. So I go ahead and raise it to 90, 3x the big blind, which is kind of my standard open. The small blind calls, and the small blind is actually the villain in this hand, and you can see him in the hand footage here. And the big blind folds. So once again, we'll go heads up to a flop. The flop comes 8-8-7 with two clubs. The small blind pretty quickly checks it over to us. we make what I think is a pretty standard C-bet into the pot of 210. We bet 160. Small blind thinks about it for a little bit, but ultimately makes the call. Turn comes a 4 of spades. So nothing particularly threatening other than, maybe 5-6. It's about the only thing that gets there on us. The small blind checks it over to us again. We go ahead and bet 275 into the pot here. And the small blind pretty quickly check raises us all in. So pretty big hand here. Definitely has us covered by a pretty significant amount. So I kind of go into the tank and start to think quite a bit. This is a pretty good player, not somebody that's going to be, doing this without a pretty good reason. So it definitely could be exploitative. Could be something like a flush draw or something else that, just trying to kind of take it down and push some of those chips around. Ultimately, we let it go, and the villain actually goes ahead and shows us pocket eights for flopped quads. So that was a pretty unfortunate hand that we ran into. Ultimately, we did still have, after even losing, a decent number of chips on this hand, still were over starting stack, but definitely the short stack, and didn't last too many more hands before ultimately getting knocked out of the tournament in, I believe, either fifth or fourth. So the third hand that I want to cover is in the cash game. The cash game was 50-cent dollar. So we bought in for 100. And at the start of this hand, our stack was at 88.50, so down, a little over $10. Still in pretty good shape, and we were maybe an hour into the cash game when this hand occurred. So the cash game was six-handed. We're in the small blind, and we look down at 6-9 offsuit. Not a super great hand. But in this particular scenario, we have the under the gun, the hijack, and the cutoff all limping. The button actually surprisingly folds. So we go ahead and complete the 50 cents to call, and the big blind checks. So we go 5 ways to a flop with $5 in the pot. The flop comes 6, 7, 9 with 2 diamonds. So we flop top and bottom pair. It checks around. Obviously, we are going to try and get some value here. So we check, and it checks around to the hijack. The hijack, who was the villain from the previous tournament hand, bets $3. The cutoff pretty quickly calls. I go ahead and raise it up to $8. Goes around to the hijack, thinks for just a couple seconds, and folds. The cutoff then, again, pretty quickly, with not a ton of hesitation, jams for $42.50 more. Obviously, without having the raise pre-flop, there's all kinds of very reasonable hands that you could show up with here. 5-8 and 8-10 for a flop straight. All the sets are possibilities, though we block those pretty heavily, so that's a little harder to get into, other than sevens, obviously. After quite a bit of deliberation, we do ultimately go ahead and call it off, or call. We still had about $30 left behind at this point, but we go ahead and make the call, and our opponent turns over king 5 of diamonds. The turn, it's a king, an offsuit king, and the river, unfortunately, was a diamond. And we are going to lose this pot. So lose a pretty big one here. And in hindsight, I think for the amount of money that was in the pot, that raises, for what we already have committed to the hand, I actually think this is an okay hand to let go of. Ultimately, I still feel like it wasn't necessarily the wrong call. I just think that it's a spot that you can probably get away from and try to find a better spot. Thanks for watching, guys.